Hello and welcome back. So first off, if you or someone you know created this render of Kane in a Rangers jersey, let me know. I'd like to credit them. It's pretty awesome. But secondly, Kane to the Rangers has been an idea lingering out there in the ether for what seems like millennia. So what has changed? Is a deal imminent? What does this mean for the Rangers? Is this a good idea? What does it mean for fantasy? That's a lot of questions, and I have some answers and thoughts, so let's dive into the Kane saga. Now, this is some of the most recent information that we've been given. This is Vince Mercogliano, beat writer for the Rangers. Basically, the deal breaks down like this. There's going to have to be a third team to take another 25% of Kane's salary to get it down to 2.6. On top of that, they would have to waive Jake Leschyshyn by before Saturday, which didn't happen today, so it would have to happen early tomorrow. I still don't know if that's possible to make it work. Or they'd have to include Leschyshyn in the deal or make some other sort of roster move to get a contract off their books to free up enough room. So we'll kind of go into that in a little bit later when we go over the trade proposals. But right now, this Steven Rosner, I'm not exactly sure who he is. I just saw that he's a relatively reputable source. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But he's saying that it sounds like this is imminent and there's a framework being ironed out right now. I've heard the same things from certain people in the Rangers circles. And then on top of that, we have Chris Johnston down here basically saying that a resolution could come in the next 24 hours or so. But that kind of challenges the fact that the Rangers kind of have to wait until trade deadline to make this work cap-wise. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of pieces to the actual deal. But the first question is, should the Rangers do this? Does this make sense for them now that they already have Tarasenko in their top six? So that's what I wanted to go over today, and it might cost Kravtsov and Zach Jones, or one of the two, in additional picks. Obviously, if you're a Chicago Blackhawks fan, you're hoping for more, and we'll get into that at a later point in this video. But let's start with the case against Patrick Kane, why the Rangers wouldn't want him. This is a tweet by Evolving Wild, basically showing that he still has a relatively good goals for per 60, and they're claiming his reputation or whatever, but that his defensive game and most of his game away from the puck is atrocious. So this is expected goals against per 60, Corsi against per 60, Corsi for per 60, and expected goals for per 60, all in the negative, with these two being humongous negatives. And then you can see right here, this is Jay Fresh's graphic, his player cards or whatever from Top Down Hockey Data. And he's basically saying he's about 7% better than a replacement player. 5% better on offense, 0% on defense. He does score some goals. He gets a lot of primary assists. He's a very good power play producer, finishes pretty well. But obviously you can see his offensive game has taken a nosedive. The finishing has kind of maintained itself relatively decent because he still shoots a lot and he's scoring goals lately. But most of his offensive metrics are down, as we will see in just a moment. But essentially the argument here is he's very assist heavy. He relies on the power play. His expected goals against and Corsi against are horrendous, meaning when he's on the ice, the other team is hemming them in and racking up shots and chances. And Kane is bad defensively, but the Rangers are 9th in expected goals against and have been as high as 3rd just a week or two ago. They're usually very solid defensively, and they could stand to add some grit on their fourth line and regain that physical presence that they lost with the exiting of Ryan Reeves and Sammy Blais. They don't necessarily need a defensive forward for their top six, however. So where he's going to slot in the lineup, he's definitely an upgrade on Jimmy Vesey. No disrespect to Vesey, he's played very well this year, but there's no comparison between Patrick Kane and Jimmy Vesey. And then you slot Vesey down onto the fourth line. He's an excellent penalty killer, along with Goudreau and Tyler Mott. Those are 3 penalty killers, 3 defensive players on your fourth line. You can use them as a checking line, a shutdown line, and then you can have a little bit more potent offense. And let's get into the reasons why you would want Patrick Kane. So what you're looking at here is his playoff production. So this is going back to 2008, 2009, the first year that he was in the playoffs. He starts out a minus the first couple of years, then he starts to pick it up when he enters his prime. But basically what you're looking at here is he's close to a point per game player in the playoffs. And more specifically, he's the 6th best NHL playoff scorer since 2008-2009. He's behind Ovechkin, Crosby, Pavelski, Malkin, and Kucherov. In addition to that, he's got 132 points in 136 playoff games. like I said, just close to a point per game. And then on top of that, he's got 11 game-winning goals, 5 overtime winners, and that is key. And you can see here, this is a tweet. Not sure who this is, but I liked his tweet, so we'll put him in here. He's in games where he could clinch the series, stave off elimination, or a Game 7. Kane has 48 points in 35 games. So he is a clutch player, and that is something that is going to get a team like the Rangers over the hump. Last year, they were very competitive against Tampa Bay in the first 2 games of the series, and then they started to fade and fade and fade. And they could have used a player like Kane to change the momentum and potentially turn the tides in their favor, especially in elimination games. Although they did have an excellent record in elimination games, coming back from behind and whatnot. But to add a piece like Kane, who's a proven playoff clutch performer, is a very key ingredient. Now, another thing that you're going to notice here, the Stanley Cup years, so you're looking at 2009, 2010, well above a point per game. Obviously, that's a long time ago. So you go to the next cup, he's just under a point per game, but he's a +7. Then you go to this year, they did not make the cup finals, but he did exceed a point per game average with a +5. And then the next year that they won the cup, point per game and a +7. So in the playoffs, when the chips are on the table, he steps up to produce, and he's scoring more goals than his lines are giving up. Now, plus-minus is not a perfect stat. I completely understand if you want to throw that away, but nonetheless, he is still, relatively speaking, a point-per-game player, even as late as 2019-20, where he had 9 points in 9 games. So that's the main argument to bring in Patrick Kane. But another argument to bring in Patrick Kane is the fact that his best goal-scoring season was the year he played with Panarin on his wing. So I kind of figured it was the opposite, that Panarin was more of a goal scorer with Kane on his wing, but it seems to be that Kane turns into a goal scorer with Panarin on his wing. 46 goals in 82 games, 106 points, his second highest point total in his Hall of Fame career. And the year he had 110 points, he was much worse defensively, or at least worse in terms of plus-minus. He was a +2 in this particular season. He was a +17 the year he played with Panarin, the first year he played with Panarin. And so you're getting a player that is potentially going to come in and become a shooter. Now, he is a shooter right now, and we'll get into that in just a second. But if you look on the right here, you'll see his assists per 60 and his points per 60, and you'll see that both of them are down compared to where they usually are. So usually in the 3.2 to 3.5 range over the last several years, he's about 1 entire assist or point per 60 lower than that right now. His assists per 60 are down as well, even compared to the most recent seasons. This is not necessarily his prime in 2021, 2020, etc. His prime would have been probably in the mid-2010s, but he was still relatively productive even up until this past season. He just doesn't have anything to work with now. And if you look at his shooting percentage, when he was in his prime, he's between 12 and 16%. Right now, he's about half of that at 8.8%. So if you get a player that plays well with him, that's feeding him the puck more, he has maintained his shot volume, but he's potentially going to be open more and have a lot more opportunities, grade A chances to score goals, as opposed to playing with guys that he's playing with right now. And I don't want to slight anybody like Max Domi or Jason Dickinson or whoever else they've got with that line, but he doesn't have the same type of caliber players that he would in New York. Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to mention in terms of why his production has been down this past season. This is just going to show you some of the frustration that he had earlier in the year. Here he is carrying the puck over the blue line. The pass doesn't connect. The puck goes back to the point. Eventually, he's going to start yelling at Seth Jones to get in the zone. What is he doing? He's 10 feet out of the zone when they're on the power play trying to get something going. And you can't hear it because I'm talking over it, but he basically yells, "Where the F are you going?" And this is the kind of frustration that he's had all season in Chicago. And we'll get to that in the next slide. So what you're looking at now is the monthly splits. In October, 9 points in 9 games, 2 goals, 7 assists, and an even plus-minus. In November, it gets a lot worse. 8 points in 13 games, -13. December, not any better. 9 points in 13 games, -11. In January, 10 games, 8 points, -2. A little bit of an improvement, at least on the plus-minus side of things. In February, 9 games, 11 points, and a +3. And that mostly comes after he gets pissed off at both New York and Toronto for not trading for him, and essentially goes ballistic in the last 4 games, where he's got 10 points in the last 4 games, including 7 goals. So he's been one of those guys that when he wants to turn it on, when he is engaged, he will be well above a point per game player. Now, if you look at his player hub, this is without hits and blocks because he doesn't do either of those things. So with hits and blocks, he's basically a 66 on the Data Draft player hub. Without hits and blocks, he's a 90 because he is still really potent offensively. His shot volume is 96th percentile in the league, still 92nd percentile in power play points. His assists, despite being down almost 0.4 assists per game, he's still 90th percentile in that as well. His point per game average is 0.79 this year. That is well below his 5-year point per game average of 1.15. So there is plenty of room for him to hit his ceiling in fantasy. And that's kind of what I wanted to discuss as it comes to fantasy talk on this Patrick Kane to New York discussion, because there is still room for improvement. You're not necessarily going to get much improvement in terms of shots. You might get a little bump in goal production. As I mentioned, he's played his best goal scoring seasons with Artemi Panarin. But you're also potentially going to get an assist bump. And then there's the power play, which we will have to talk about in just a second. Now, what would the lines look like if the Rangers did trade for Patrick Kane? Well, this is one potential line combination. Kane could be with Kreider and Zibanejad, essentially trying to act like Pavel Buchnevich or Matt Zuccarello when they had success with those two players. This frees up Tarasenko to play with Panarin, giving Panarin a legitimate shooting threat on his wing. And then essentially the kid line stays together, and then the fourth line becomes Gaudreau, Vesey, and Mott. This is one look that they could go for, but there's also another look. They could obviously put Kane with Trocheck and Panarin. They could obviously switch these two centers, but it gives them a lot of flexibility in game to make adjustments. If guys aren't working well together, they can tweak, and they have a lot of pieces in this top 9 to potentially find some winning combinations that can produce some offense. Obviously, what happened after the Tarasenko trade is Artemi Panarin kind of boosted his production. Obviously, he had that 4-goal game against Carolina, but he had 6 goals, 3 assists, 9 points in the first 3 games after the Tarasenko trade. So either way, this presents Gallant with many different options to juggle lines in game to find the optimal combinations. But the main issue is the power play. Where does he fit in this power play? He's potentially, you can slot him in maybe where Tarasenko is, put Tarasenko down, but who comes out? The only player I could think of coming out is Keandre Miller, which would leave power play 2 with no defenseman. And I would probably move Tarasenko down and then put Patrick Kane here. But you're kind of messing with some chemistry at that point. This top unit, aside from Tarasenko, it's been Trocheck most of the year, but they've been together all season, and not just this season, but for the past 3 seasons. Obviously, Ryan Strome was in that spot. They put Trocheck there this year. They've recently moved Tarasenko up and moved Trocheck back to give a little bit more balance to their second unit. But nonetheless, there is a reason to be concerned if you own Patrick Kane in fantasy, because Kane is a power play points monster. Over his last 4 seasons, he's been between 0.32 and 0.40 power play points per game every year, and it's obviously a staple of his game. So is this a reason to not trade for Kane? Absolutely not. It's a great problem to have. This may impact his fantasy production though, but it won't slow down his 3.3 shot per game pace, and it will probably help his assists skyrocket back to their normal levels. Goal scoring may increase, although he seems to have increased that on his own after seemingly becoming pissed at Toronto for not trading for him and immediately putting up a hat trick and scoring 7 goals and 10 points in his last 4 games. But what will this trade look like? How will this actually go down? So this is a tweet kind of summing up what the cap situation is for the Rangers. They have about a little bit less than $750,000 in cap space right now. They would potentially have to have a lot of juggling happen. They'd have to ship out Kravtsov and Lecision, which gets them to around $2.4 million in cap space. If they wait until the deadline, they could just squeak by and get to the $2.6 million, barely. Now that is one option. This is just a couple of options that they could potentially get in terms of compensation: a 2nd-round pick and Vitaly Kravtsov, a 3rd-round pick to whoever's going to retain this. That's kind of high for whoever's going to retain. Obviously, Minnesota just retained some money, and they ended up with a 5th-round pick. I get that it's a lot more money to retain, so maybe it does have to be a 3rd, but nonetheless, this is one option. We also have this tweet here. This is a little bit more creative. To Montreal, Vitaly Kravtsov for retaining that salary for Patrick Kane. And the reason that they mentioned Montreal is because there's a connection there with Jeff Gorton, who is the guy who drafted Vitaly Kravtsov. So maybe there's an incentive there for Montreal to retain some salary. Zach Jones heads to Chicago with a second-round pick and Jake Leschyshyn, mainly to get the cap to work. And then Braden Schneider sent down for 3 games, and that's kind of an important point. Schneider is one of the only players that they could send down that isn't going to go through waivers that would get them some cap relief. So if they wanted to go with Harper and Mikkola as their third pair, they could send Schneider down for a couple games, accrue a little bit more cap space, and make this work without some of these other moving parts. But the last potential trade rumor that I've been hearing is obviously Kravtsov, Jones, and a second for Kane. And that seems to be where a lot of people online are falling right about now. Side note, imagine the Hawks get Zach Jones and they now have 3 Joneses on their blue line. That would be a nightmare for most announcers, but it'd be pretty funny nonetheless. Now, Hawks fans are not happy about this. They are, as of now, if this was the package, Kravtsov, Zach Jones, and a mid-round pick, how would you feel? Upset we didn't get more. And I've seen a lot of Blackhawks fans claiming that Lafreniere or Kakko have to be a part of the deal. That is a pipe dream. That will never happen. The Blackhawks have absolutely no leverage here whatsoever. They either take whatever package the Rangers have or let Kane walk for nothing. He holds all the cards. He has a no-move clause. And the last time a player was traded in circumstances like this, it was Taylor Hall playing for Buffalo with a no-move clause. The Sabres ended up retaining 50%, also traded Curtis Lazar, and only got back a second-round pick in Anders Bjork. So there are more moving parts to this one, including a third team for salary retention, and the caliber of player is definitely higher, so I would expect something similar to Kravtsov, Jones, and a second to be the deal that actually ends up happening. But make no mistake, Lafreniere, Kakko, Schneider, Othman, most of the blue-chip Rangers prospects are not on the table, nor should they be. The Rangers have a massive cap crunch this summer with around $14 million to dole out to about 8 players, including Keandre Miller, Philip Hedl, Lafreniere, and more. So they're going to need players in the lineup on entry-level deals with waiver exemption to play relatively significant roles on the team next year. This is why they extended Vesey and Harper at about $750K. So with that being said, what do you think of all this? What do you think the return should be? Will this help the Rangers compete with the likes of Boston in the East, who also just upgraded their team? Will these prices set the Blackhawks up for the future? Are you tired of hearing about Patrick Kane? Has you or a loved one been exposed to asbestos? Just kidding. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. Follow on Twitter and Instagram for more short-form fantasy hockey content. As always, I'll see you in the next one, and don't forget to set your fantasy lineups. Cheers.